Hello, you're welcome to the AELEX first ever FinTech Fireside Chats. And for today, your host is Opeyemi Araromi. I am an associate with the AELEX TMT Innovation and FinTech Practice Group, and it is a pleasure to be here. The topic for today is promoting digital finance in developing economies, the role of regulation. And I have a special guest with us, Ms. Tolulope Omoloye Osindero. Tolulope is a family member of the family. Tolulope actually did her NYC with AELEX. Then she moved to UUBO. And at the moment, she's the head of Legal and Compliance Manager of Branch International. Branch International is one of the foremost leading FinTech organization in Nigeria with branches in Uganda, Tanzania, United States, and my understanding is they're also exploring into other countries. So without further ado, I would welcome Ms. Tolulope. Tolu, you're welcome to the Fireside Chat today.
Thank you very much, Opeyemi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to see your face, and we are honored to have you with us today.
Pleasure is all mine, and the honor is mine as well.
Okay, so as I had mentioned earlier, this is our first ever FinTech Fireside Chat, and it is being streamed live on YouTube. So in the event that your friends were unable to register with our link, this can still be watched live because it's being streamed live on YouTube. I will jump right into it right now. And Tolu, can you share with us a brief background of how your journey into the FinTech started?
Okay, so like I said, I'm a lawyer, qualified practice in Nigeria, and I started my practice at the prestigious law firm of AELEX arbitrators. Solicitors, and I set up my NYC there, and after that I moved to Rodman Belosage. Really started with the private equity team. Worked on due diligence, acquisitions, and then I moved into the banking and finance practice. And I was there, so I was worked in that practice before I went for my master's. And I think it was during my master's that I started to encounter stuff that related to fintech, peer-to-peer lending, especially crowdfunding. So eventually I wrote my dissertation on peer-to-peer lending as a source of financing for small businesses. Returning back to the practice at UUBO, then it was a question of, what's happening in Nigeria around this area. Obviously, not a lot was happening, not like anybody was kind of crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending, but then it started to evolve. And, I think in 2016 or so, I had the opportunity of working with a company that was assisting African companies crowdfund outside of Nigeria. So, with that, I now started to, get familiar with some assignments that my team had to work on, related to fintech. And I think it just happened. I would say it happened organically. So it wasn't like I actively sought to what's the new practice area. It was just something that happened organically. And from there, I was curating articles from Tech Point and Tech Cabal on what's happening in the tech world and in the fintech world. I started to develop a big interest in it. And that's how I became known as some of the go-to person within the firm for fintech. And fortunately, I think also when you're interested in something, nature of fate just generally ensures that the right resources come to you, the right opportunities come to you. We started to get quite a number of significant fintech assignments, from advisory work to licensing work, working on acquisitions within the space, and yeah, that's how I got into the space. And after a while, it was a question of, okay, it'd be nice to get into this sector as an operator, not only just an advisor. And the right opportunity came when I joined Branch last year. And I would say that, it's been very exciting, very interesting, being in the trenches, not just, working from an advisor perspective. So that's how I journeyed into the fintech sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Tolu. Once again, if you are just joining this Fireside Chat, this is AELEX first ever FinTech discussion, and it is being streamed live on YouTube. So Tolu, we have people who are actually, we have operators, we have lawyers watching us live. We also have people who are like lay persons that are actually also watching us live. So based on your understanding, and before we dive right into regulation, do you want to like explain what digital finance is in a layman's term for people who are still trying to understand what we mean by digital finance?
Okay, so I would say that when I think about digital finance, I think about it as the whole concept of service delivery in the financial services industry using the web, internet, mobile technology. So it goes beyond, it goes from something as maybe not complex anymore as electronic banking or banking, through the website to something as simple as transacting or sending money via USSD. So again, going through the whole, the various channels, digital channels that are available to us now, for financial services, and just doing stuff in that space. I'm sure that quite a number of people know that traditionally. So I remember when I was going to I was going to get my allowance when I was getting to university in 2000 and something. I won't mention the year. And my dad had written a check, and then I remember going to First Bank on, I think, back when I can't remember, and stood on the queue to try to get the money out. I think I first went alone, and I didn't have an ID card or something, so I had to go back the next day. But I remember because it was long, but I was trying to get money out. So I was going to university, my dad had sent me money, and I needed to get money out. I imagine that now, if you were getting your allowance from your parents, you wouldn't even need to go to the bank, because your dad or whoever was sending you money would send you money, via the banking app or whatever it is, and you can get that money by walking into the, you could even actually pay for the stuff that you need to pay for without going anywhere, by buying stuff online. You could also walk to an ATM point and get your cash out without having to, maybe you may have to keep, but something easier than having to feel a withdrawal slip at the bank. So essentially, when you think about digital finance, stuff that, related to finance, so there's banking, there's payment, there's investments parts, stuff that used to be reserved for the super rich. But now you and I don't know when you might be super rich, so maybe I shouldn't say you and I, but I'll say that people that are not super rich have access to things like buying stocks online or buying foreign stocks, because you're able to access these websites, or you're able to access this sort of services on mobile apps. So that's how I think about digital finance. So it's also it's not limited to payments, so it cuts across payments, banking, e-commerce. Let's think about how financial services and what it covers. From raising funds, even capital raising projects for companies that you do in a certain way. Now you're able to do it in a different way. You're able to raise funds online, through crowdfunding websites, vertical lending websites, and all of those things. The insurance that probably is still heavily regulated, and there were ways which would buy insurance. Some of these things have also changed. First with the delivery of the service, which is also has changed. With the way service is being delivered. You can call your broker. Some insurance companies have mobile apps that without having to walk into their office, you could actually pay for your premium, get your certificate sent to you, and everything is done via digital. So that's the way that I would think about digital finance.
Okay, so if I get you well, you mentioned that digital finance is like technology with finance, everything that can now be done online, such as e-banking, USSD, lending services, crowdfunding, insurance payments, and others. So I just want to know, does crypto assets and similar, does it fall under digital finance as well?
Yes, it does. Because when you think about cryptocurrency, the two, I've always think about it when you think about it as the currency that you use for payments. For some other people, they think about it as store of value, even though it's volatile. But that's stuff that you don't normally look at a traditional currency for. I use Naira for payments, we use Naira as a store of value. But now you now have cryptocurrencies that can do that for you. And it's all enabled by cryptography and the internet. So that's also that's also a form of digital finance, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So from your experience at branch, do you think regulations play a major role in the growth and public acceptance of digital finance in developing economies?
I think regulation plays a major role, and that's my that's straight to the point. And let me start from the basics. Because when we talk about finance, banking, first, I think it's first to recognize that people's funds are involved. So whether it's deposit in the bank, it's savings, or it's investments, people's funds are involved. And, there needs to be safeguards, there needs to be, standards, just in terms of people that, custodians or people that are dealing with other people's funds. And if you think about it, I think prior to now, for ages, finance has always been regulated. It's always been a regulated industry. So it's now a question of, do we go heavily regulated? Do we adopt a light touch regime, just in terms of achieving our objectives? And that objective could be something as simple as promoting. Well, it's not simple. It might be something, our objectives could be promoting financial stability or price stability, or just even, promoting innovation. So I would start with that premise. Finance is always regulated because you deal with people's funds, and, regulations will play a major role, or regulations have always played a major role. So let's start with that basis. Then when you now think about it, you can actually use regulation as a way to promote digital finance, or promote how people accept or don't interact, the ability to interact with finance or digital tools that aid finance. So for example, I'll take the CBN's cashless policy. I think it's a no-brainer that that policy is responsible, has been a major driver for several of the innovations that we've seen in payments in Nigeria. And years ago, you probably would not have thought of these entities called PSSPs that have creative payment solutions that let you send money without leaving your house, without doing a lot, just with your phone. And all of these have come as a result of the CBN's push for the cashless policy. So that's a clear example. With that, take mobile money transactions. Now, if you go to a market in Lagos without cash, I'm sure that you would pay for your stuff, without trouble. So even if worst case, you meet someone that is, you meet a trader, so fine, the traders that will accept USSD payments from you, the people that you probably can scan to pay. And if you find traders that are really, really, insist on cash, you would probably find a mobile money agent in that market that would give you cash. Yeah. So I would say that, regulations play a major role. So, it certainly it's a major driver in whether we accept what's it called, the public acceptance of finance or otherwise, especially even so in both emerging economies and developed economies. So one of the reasons why London became a major financial hub at the time was because it was welcoming. London was welcoming, investment banks, investment houses, banks, and all of this, because there was sort of a light touch regulatory regime, and that means that we know that, okay, this is the regime here. It's a bit easier or more accommodating for businesses, and that's something that's useful just in terms of using regulation as a tool for driving certain policies, including policies that have to do with finance.
Okay, so based on what you've said now, it's my understanding that the regulation has actually also helped to improve financial inclusion, especially in rural areas because you mentioned something about mobile money transactions, things are now done. Yes, so is my understanding correct?
You're very correct. Yeah, so I'll just go through with the mobile money transactions that you have mentioned, and I will take the poster child for mobile money in Africa, which is in M-Pesa in Kenya. And if you dig through the history of M-Pesa in Kenya, at the time that Safaricom was going to introduce it, they didn't have a regulatory framework for it. But what the regulators did at the point was to give a letter of no objection, which is something that's very important. Like, I don't understand this thing. I don't know how I'm going to regulate it, but I think it might be useful. I'm willing for you to try, and that's something that's, I imagine that if the regulator at the Ministry of Finance or the CBK had said, this is prohibited, we haven't done it before, we're not going to let it test it, I imagine that maybe M-Pesa would probably not exist today. But that was an approach that, regulators should also consider, give a letter of no objection. And that's something that, some regulators are also looking to do, or already doing with the sandbox program, where you're allowed to test your products, maybe with limited users or with limited capital, such that you're able to access the viability and security of your product, of your service. And all of this boils down to regulations. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'll just move right to another instance. You recall the period where like a certain regulation, this is for a different sector though, certain regulations came in the days of we had Gokada, OPE, and then in Lagos State, some regulations came in that basically disrupted some of the activities of these players in this particular sector. So for the fintech sector now, what would you identify as challenges that might be involved with liaising with regulators? Do you think that there's not sufficient liaising with regulators? That's why like new regulation comes and then it disrupts activities of players in the sector. So if that is the case, can you also mention other challenges that, you know, might stifle companies promoting digital finance in Nigeria? I hope you got all my questions.
I will try to answer them. So first, you had a question around challenges we're engaging with regulators and like using regulators in Nigeria. And I think that a couple of points here is one. I think first, when you think about the fact that you're going to a business or you're already in a business that's regulated, you need to recognize that your regulator has certain powers. Yeah. They have the power to probably revoke your license, they have the power to impose fines on you, you have the power to take you to court. And I think that understanding is important for the CEO, your head of legal, your compliance, or even your chief business officer. And so it's not, I don't say this so that you're afraid of the regulators, but I say this so that you understand the setting that you are, the environments that you are, and the powers that you have. So when you recognize that, then it now informs the sort of strategy that you should adopt in terms of engaging regulators. So one thing that I have found is quite a lot of people operate from their preconceived notions of regulators. And it could be disadvantageous. So the way a regulator will treat you might be different from the way a regulator will treat another entity. I mean, that doesn't mean that the rules applied to different, should be applied differently. But it's also, there's no one size fits all. Even for the regulators. The rules are the rules, the entity neutral, but the way the rules might be applied sometimes might be different because of the kind of customers or service or product or channels that you're using. So I'd say that, because you're a competitor, you have a co-founder, that has dealt with certain regulators and then their feedback was, oh, it was horrible. Oh, we wrote a letter, they didn't even acknowledge it. And then, weeks later, they slammed us with this. Fine. Doesn't mean that that's the way the regulator would react to your own situation. So I would say that have a strategy and have a regulatory stance. How do we want to engage regulators? How do we want to build a relationship with regulators, which is important. And I think that startups, medium-sized companies in Nigeria as well are getting to that place where they understand that they have to engage regulators. And when you think about it from perspective of, so for example, like you mentioned the CBN, think about it that banks have been regulated by the CBN, for as long as they've existed. So they have an understanding that this is their regulator. We need to find a way to deal with them. We claim that we say that we're here to disrupt certain things. Also need to understand that we need to engage with regulators and find out how banks have done this, how have they navigated some of the issues that they've had to deal with the regulators. So not everything that the banks have done to have been by the books. Not every product or service or stuff that they've done, were regulated. So maybe I'm sure that by the time maybe even banks changed their banking software or when they thought about cards, some of them might have been at a time where the CBN have regulations or some of these things. So they would have had to engage the CBN to say, oh, we want to do this thing, and it's not within the regulation. How do we proceed? So I think that's the way that we should also think about some of these things. Having preconceived notions of the regulator, not engaging or not even engaging early, it's a challenge and it's something that needs to be dealt with. There's also there's also the point where you need to think like a regulator. So I understand that we are, there's the regulator, the operators, and we all won't think differently. But if you're going to approach a regulator, I think you should think like the regulator. What do they want to see? If you say that, I want to introduce, assuming that this is 2021, assume that we're in 2010, and then you're looking to introduce a payment service that, allows people to scan QR codes, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously, at that time, there were no QR codes regulations, nothing that guide you. But then you also know that it's some sort of payment service or some sort of payment provision, and you understand that largely you will most likely be regulated by the CBN, but then you also know that some of the CBN regulations that would apply to your business. It might not apply to the QR code because there are no regulations, but there are certain aspects of the regulations like consumer protection, anti-money laundering rules, security standards, and all of those would apply to you. In engaging them, you don't go and just, attend a meeting or prepare slides and say that we want to do this and there are no regulations that apply to our business. Can we get a letter of no objection, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that, any reasonable regulator would want to engage with you that way. I think it makes sense if you say that this is the business we're looking to go into. We understand that certain of, there are already some existing framework that would apply to us generally, but we feel like this part of our business is currently not regulated, or we don't think that regulations apply to us, and what can be done. So I would say things like the regulator, not thinking like a regulator, or not engaging enough would not help you, because if you go back to the basis that this is the regulator for this market or for this space, and they have the power to do certain things, not being on their good side or not even engaging at all with land to trouble. And one thing that I have discovered in the last couple of weeks really is that we collaborate with banks to provide service to consumers. So when I say we, I'm talking about fintechs and innovators. We collaborate with banks to deliver service. I think that one thing we can start to look at is collaborating with banks to actually engage with our regulators, or collaborating with telcos that we partner with to engage regulators. They've been doing this for years. They probably have teams that this is all they look at all day. I think it's time that we start to do that, collaborate with these people in terms of engaging with regulators, because I feel like it's another path, it's another it's another avenue to probably get better responses. So I serve as the Secretary General of the Nigerian FinTech Association. And I know that one of the stuff that we've also done is to try to bring like relevant stakeholders together to engage regulators on behalf of fintechs. And I would say that some of these have yielded significant results.
Okay.
And that is a question.
Yes, it did. I just have a follow-up question to that. So most organizations would actually come from the angle of it's probably when they are not regulated, but by the time you go to the CBN or other people, like you mentioned the QR code, for instance, that there's no regulation on it, it's probably when you now go to meet them and start asking questions, engaging them, that's when regulation will not come.
I know. There's always that risk that you can probably get away with doing this thing quietly because there's really no clear regulation. And which is why I say, have a regulatory strategy where for some people, we will jump the gun. If there are consequences, we'll deal with it at that time. For some people, they're probably more conservative to say, on a no-name basis, I would write to the regulator and find out whether this is something that they think. Because sometimes there might not be regulations, but they're already thinking about it. They've engaged stakeholders that you're not. Even before the open banking, for example, the open banking regulations that were released, they said prior to that, CBN had engaged quite a number of people on the open banking rules and all of that. Even as far back as 2015 or so, 16, I know the CBN had a working group that was looking at blockchain technology. 6 years after, we now finally get regulations on e-naira. So even though you think that there are no regulations, doesn't mean that they aren't thinking about it. I'm sorry I keep mentioning the CBN. Same for this, they are looking at crowdfunding regulations before last year when they eventually released the rules. So it might be something that they're already thinking about. And if you're up, if you feel like your organization's strategy is to jump the gun and then you get consequences, well, I hope you don't have some serious shareholders or investors to answer to. But yeah, like you said, there's that risk that when you write the letter, that's when someone would say that absolutely this is being regulated. But that's also good for you because you've gotten some certainty. One thing that we always complain about is not having regulatory uncertainty. You're not sure what's applicable, blah blah blah. When you write and if you write and they don't respond to you, you can say later that you wrote, there was evidence that there was some requests for clarity or for guidance from the regulator and you didn't get a response. But if you now don't write and you assume that you're not regulated, because again, some of these things, what we're looking for is the regulation of the business. Whereas what's being regulated is the activity. So you may not be a bank, but then you're carrying out or you're providing something that is that can easily be interpreted as a banking business, which is something that needs a banking license. But you're not a banking technology company. So writing sometimes or engaging, the regulator in that way sometimes will give you clarity as to, okay, so this is applicable to us, even though we're not a bank, we're not looking to be the financial advisor or issuing us, but because of the service that we're rendering, it's something that's being regulated already.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So at this juncture, I just wanted to note that if anyone has questions, you could probably just put your questions in the Q&A session, and I would take questions randomly when I'm having my questions and ask Tolu some of your questions.
Sure.
So we'll just go back to the questions, Tolu. So I just wanted to talk about the cryptocurrency ban earlier this year, where some FinTech organizations like, should I be mentioning names, like Luno, RiseVest, some of them, like their banks had to write to them that their activities that they do is related to crypto, and then there was a ban from the CBN. So based on like those kind of instances that occur, would you say that the regulators actually probably have a depth of knowledge in these areas? And because I've realized that one of the first approach by the regulator is always a ban before like there's now like discourse. So I wanted to ask here, do you think there's a depth of knowledge on that side? That's why there's always a ban before a discourse. And if yes, is there a role that operators and players in this sector, can actually play within the space to close that knowledge gap?
Okay, so at the risk of being quoted, I wouldn't agree that there's a depth of knowledge in the regulator. I think that this is the way that I think about, or I see this.
Okay.
When we look at the fact that let's give I think it will be arrogance on our side to think that there's a depth of knowledge. They know these things. The people like you and I that work in ministries and at the regulatory authorities, and they understand the same things that we do. The question is whether they're the ones that are making the decisions, or whether they're the ones that are interpreting or liaising with the operators. So when you also think about it from the perspective of there's a team at the regulators that's writing these regulations. Clearly, even if we are adopting regulations from another country, there's a team that has gone through this. So for that, I would give some credit to the regulators that there's some knowledge of these things that we're doing. It may not be at the level that you and I have, because again, it's our own day-to-day hustle. Every day we're looking at what competitors are doing, what are we doing to innovate, how can we improve our service, what's the new technology that can help us, what's the new channel, who's using Instagram. Those are things that we are looking at day-to-day every day. So obviously we're going to be ahead of the regulators. So there's usually, or there's always going to be like a knowledge gap. And I think that's not really the issue. But I think it's an issue, but I think that's not the major, that's not the end of it. So there's going to be a knowledge gap. Question is, how do we address this gap? Because again, this gap affects us.
Yeah.
So engaging with the regulators in a way, or that so I think one thing we need to now find a way to do is, how do we now share the knowledge that we have in a way that we're not putting out too much, we're not putting ourselves into trouble. And I think there are a couple of initiatives that that's facilitated some sort of knowledge exchange between regulators and operators. Again, I'm going to mention FinTech NGR. This is not an advert, but I'm the secretary, and I know that some of the activities. So we have a regulators forum where we just exchange ideas with regulators that that impact the FinTech space. I know that one or two licensed entities, have worked into presentations and trainings with regulators where they sort of try to explain and share their knowledge of what they're doing in their space and all of that. But we need to do more of those, because again, if they don't properly understand, and if that understanding doesn't go from the bottom up, it's going to be difficult. You can't regulate properly, or you can't regulate effectively if you do not really understand. And it's not something that's peculiar to us in Nigeria, in Africa, and in emerging economies. It's also the same thing in developed economies. So if you look at the UK, the US, even the EU, Canada, these regulators are also they might be faster in terms of trying to build capacity, but they're also building capacity themselves. And when you think about all of these things, several things are evolving. You haven't gotten, you've not gotten a hang of tokens or security tokens, and then someone's talking about NFTs, and you're like, come on, we haven't even gotten a hang of this one, and you moved here. So things are evolving
pretty quickly. Yeah.
So there's going to be that gap. We just need to find a way to ensure that we engage to the extent that we're not seen to be sitting on a high horse. We try to share knowledge with the regulators. And I know that some of the regulators are pretty receptive to stuff like that. So if you write something that we would like to engage with your team or something like this, or maybe organizations, I know that what's it called? I think the Capital Market Association has done something similar, or they may not have. I don't remember. I can't remember now. But I know that some other organizations have also done sort of knowledge share with regulators, because it's for the benefit of everyone. So if your regulators understand, and there's the will as well. It benefits both the operators and the consumers and the markets, even investors as well, because I can imagine that companies that are invested in any of all of these entities that had their accounts banned or their business models interrupted would have had a hard time trying to figure out how do we get out of this, how we have handled this better, and all of those. So again, it's a conversation that needs to continue. So it's a conversation that needs to continue. I would enjoin everyone as much as you can. I couldn't say that because I think about it. I have friends that work with regulatory agencies, and I know that some of the things, I think as far back as 2016 or so, I met someone that was at CBN. It was in payments department, and maybe he was also on the blockchain group at that time, but he had a deep understanding of blockchain that was even rare at the time, and he was at CBN. But he might be 1 out of 15.
Yeah,
and that also that shows in the regulations and the actions that's been taken. And there's also the what's called that rather remain silent. There's also sometimes political undertones with these things that you just generally go beyond knowledge.
Okay. So just as an aside, based on what you said, you had mentioned something about NFTs. Like these things usually come near. Like we've just moved from this, we are moving to non-fungible tokens. Like how is it related? So I wanted to talk about the e-naira. So even though the e-naira came immediately after the crypto ban, many people have actually complained that it's similar to the naira, where there's inflation in the e-naira. So do you think, probably just in your opinion, whether like adequate understanding was, like, background was put into place before the e-naira came into place? Was there like a proper layout, framework, background before the e-naira? Just one line, just your opinion. You're not being quoted.
I think that more work needs to be done. Okay. And I think that more work needs to be done. Just in terms of what do we really, really want to achieve? Are we trying to just give people the alternative of paying using, having the digital version of the naira? Because again, and what are we trying to achieve with that? Like you said, if the naira gets the value today, so does the e-naira. And does the e-naira offer you the advantages that you get with using other cryptocurrencies? I mean, apart from people that use it for illegal or illegal
activities.
Does it give us that advantage? What's the incentive to use it, apart from the fact that the CBN makes it mandatory? Why would I want to use the e-naira? So I think a lot of work still needs to be done. So why is there? I reserve my comments.
Thank you.
But I mean, one other thing that might be would be I reserve my comments for it. But there's also a question around the implementation of the e-naira itself, and we will see in the coming weeks. We will see.
Okay, so I just wanted to quickly take this question. What is your advice for a startup that has developed a financial technology product? I'm reading like a question from the audience. What is your advice for a startup that's developed a financial technology product that does not come under any of CBN's licensing regime? I think this is like a follow-up question from what we've discussed earlier. So I just thought to quickly take it. Should I read it again?
No, I think I got the question. So you know that the regulation, there's a lot of entity or business regulation in Nigeria. So when I say entity or business regulation, it means that, what's being regulated is this type of organization or this type of business, whatever it is. But in addition to that, there's also the regulation of activity. So even though you think that, I think you also need to consider and properly analyze with the help of advisors, what your core business is. So if your core business is payment is regulated. It might be that your channel is not being regulated, or there might be something with your business model that you feel takes start of the regulation. But if what you're really doing is facilitating payment itself, payment is regulated. So when a couple of years ago, I know people say FinTech is not regulated. FinTech is regulated. So you need to analyze what you're actually doing. And that's what's going to help you come to that decision as to whether it's being regulated or not. So if you're facilitating, what's it called now? If you're helping companies raise funds, even though you're not doing it in the traditional way, I feel like, that takes you out of regulation. I think that you might be, because again, if you're offering to members of the public, then that also, that brings you within the regulatory ambit of inviting members of the public and all of that. So you need to disintegrate your model, ask the basic question of what are you providing to your users? Are you facilitating payments? Is this something that a bank can do, or stuff that bank used to do, even though it was not digital, or they're not using the channels that you're using? So I think that's the question. And then when you answer that question, I think that would, and if you talk to the relevant advisors, they will be able to guide you and let you know that, okay, this is it. And then even though this might be the license category that covers it, it might not be suitable for you. And then you can now take that decision of whether you want to continue, or you want to write to the CBN, or you want to apply to join the CBN, the sandbox program of the CBN, where you're able to test new technology.
Okay.
I hope that was useful.
Yes. Well, for me, yes. Okay. So based on our discussion so far, one thing that I've picked actually is that there are actually many laws in the fintech space, from the CBN, from SEC, from like different regulatory bodies. So most players or operators of this space would say that one of the biggest challenges with regulation in Nigeria is the multiplicity of regulators with different requirements. And then a few people have regulated for just one, they've advocated for one regulatory document. So do you think that a single regulation is necessary to create clarity for companies whose business entail digital finance services?
Okay, so before I respond to your question, let me say that Nigeria, I think in Nigeria, go to the US, it's worse. Because first you have to do federal regulations, and then you have to do state regulations. And they have quite a number of regulatory authorities that apply to from the office of the OCC to the FDIC to the Federal Reserve, National, and quite a number of regulators. I don't think this is the question. This is an issue that's peculiar to us in Nigeria.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that it's a good company to be, but it's just something that's peculiar to us. If you also go to, I think, both Kenya and probably India as well, and a couple of other countries, they have the SCU, they have a central bank, they have the entity, the regulator that's in charge of telecoms, they probably have a regulator that's in charge of consumer protection separately, and all of that. And why is this so? So when we think about digital finance, I think about it from the different spectrum of life, the touch points that this thing covers. So it goes from, let's break down financial services. There's banking, there's the investment side, there's insurance, there's payments, and all of these things also interact with telecommunications, mobile networks, interact with data, privacy, consumer protection, money laundering. There's really no way that you're going to be able to get to one regulator to cover all of this. So, it's just I don't think it's a problem that's peculiar to us. I think what we can do is to ensure that there's some sort of coordination amongst regulators for fintechs. So are they speaking one with one another? So I mean, I'll take consumer protection, as an example. The CBN has regulations on consumer protection. The NCC has regulations on consumer protection. There's the FCCPA, that's enforced by the FCCPC, and all of these border consumer protection. And God bless you that you're an entity that's licensed by CBN, and then you also have some relationship with telcos. All of these regulations are applicable to you somehow, and sometimes they're not all the same. So there needs to be some sort of coordination, between the regulators. Yes, and the regulations, same thing for the regulations. So what we might do, or what we consider what some countries have done. So in Ghana, they have a FinTech and Innovation Office, and I think that serves as a liaison, office that speaks to the central bank, speaks to other regulators that are that play in the space. And so it's not only Ghana. I'm not sure. I think Canada or some other country also has some sort of office that there's a central body that just speaks to other regulators, just in terms of making sure that there's some sort of coordination, uniformity. It's the way it is. We may have some, because again, this concept is also fairly new. It's about a couple of years now. We may, in the next 10 years, maybe it might be too far, be able to come up, at that time we might have done enough work where we're able to come up with some sort of, consolidated rule book or regulation on law or whatever it is, and we might be able to maybe reduce the number of regulators that are applicable at that time. Some of our regulators might have built enough capacity to handle more or whatever it is. But it's a problem. So, don't get me wrong, it's a problem because, again, you have to deal with different regulators. You have to, even from a compliance perspective, we have to, yes, but, what we can do or what can be done, some sort of gets them speaking to one another. I don't know that we are going to be able to get one regulator that can effectively, I don't know that we're going to get one law or one regulation that's going to cover all of the different touch points, that are applicable to this business.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tolu. It's been fun and enlightening so far. I'm not done though. So the next question, while you were discussing, you had mentioned that you are the Secretary of FinTech Association. So this is just perfect. So when policies are being made or when regulations are being drafted, are there steps that stakeholders can take to shape such policies? So I understand, for instance, now we have the Nigerian Startup Bill that AELEX is the lead legal team drafting the bill, and different organizations, different bodies have been, we've gotten feedback from them, their comments and all of that. So do you think, before regulations are made in Nigeria and other developing economies as well, are there steps that stakeholders like FinTech Association that you belong to can take to shape such policies such that we are actually promoting digital finance in our economy? Digital finance meaning technology related to banks, crypto, e-naira, all of those things, everything together. Then if yes, can you share a few of those recommended steps that you think this association can actually help out with?
Okay. So I would say that first thing would be to engage. So, the different types of engagements, but first thing would be to engage. So, whether you're licensed or not, there are avenues for you to engage. In fact, if you're licensed by a regulator, it means that they have a file, they keep records, or whatever it is. It also means that you're able to write to a particular department or write to the regulator expressing certain concerns, or expressing your thoughts. And usually before, sometimes before at least laws or some regulations are passed, the regulator would share a draft for public comments. When that draft is shared, if you have comments, respond, share your comments. I have asked to respond to a couple of, share my thoughts on, some of these regulations before they were passed. I know that last year we at the FinTech NGL also reviewed the draft bill, amending the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act. And there were some regulations, there were actually some provisions that were there that that were not friendly, to the fintech community, and were able to get things expunged in the final bill that was passed. So that's some of the advocacy efforts of the fintech NGR. And our members also had the opportunity of sending their comments to us. So if there's a public draft of a regulation, whatever it is, send your comments. And sometimes it's as simple as send your comments and write the name of your company. If you don't feel confident about that, right, leave it and make it anonymous. But you shared your comments and try to follow up. And you should also build relationships with regulators such that you're able to also get them to listen to you, depending on how big you are, or even if you're a small player. Sometimes there's also the power of personal relationships where you might just even be a desk officer that would take your comments up and say, my organ has to hear these comments because this is the way this person has express these comments. I think it's going to be useful, blah, blah, blah. And then your comments get to the decision maker. So I'd say engage the regulator such that you're able to shape policies. There's also the part of empowering, stakeholders. And so when I say empower stakeholders, it's just also, I think about it from function of, knowledge sharing. You're in this market, you're in this space, you know what's coming, you know what's all that, maybe you work, for example, we're in different markets, we're in India, Kenya, Uganda, and we see what's happening in some of these markets, and some of the regulations or some of the things that they're doing there might also be applicable in Nigeria, given our what's it called. So it's something simple as, engaging your regulators, say, we think that we have this proposal for you, or, this work, still in other regulations on other jurisdictions, and we think it might be applicable to you. So you've sort of let them see you as a partner.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's not always applicable. It doesn't always work. But you should have made an effort, because so when they think about, we need to set up a committee on blockchain, or we need to set up a committee on cryptocurrency, or whatever it is, and then the relevant people like, yeah, we've got several letters from this company. Let's call them. And that's how you work sometimes in practice. Like, let's call them. And then you're in the committee. You're able to actually get things done, or get things changed. So I feel like that's a way you can shape policies. We don't have like a formal lobbying system in Nigeria. One of the things I'm saying, the US and some countries actually like formal lobbying companies that can lobby the regulators, lobby lawmakers for you. But in the absence of that, you should try an informal lobbying system, within the ambit of the law, just make sure that you're not being caught in stuff that's illegal. But here, those are ways that I feel like you can also shape policies. And I mean, join FinTech NGR or any other association. There's FinTech NGR, there's FinTech 1000, the number of, associations that what they also try to do. So there's some advocacy effort on their own part, just in terms of getting regulators to listen to the markets and listen to operators before releasing regulations, or even engaging with them after they've released regulations or after they've taken certain actions.
Okay, thank you, Tolu. So we have another question. Is there an international framework of regulation of FinTech?
International framework of regulations for FinTech? I don't believe that there is. I mean, I know that. So there might be pockets of regulations by international bodies like the IOSCO on securities trading. There might be stuff from the EU in terms of, as it applies to cryptocurrency or digital tokens and stuff like that. But if what you're asking is whether there's an international, like a convention that applies to all FinTech authorities, I'm not aware of any such.
Okay. And I hope that answers your question, one of the audience. So Lou, you're one of the leading in-house counsel for a FinTech company in Nigeria. How would you advise young lawyers looking to use their legal career to promote digital finance to proceed? So yes, on this call we have lawyers, we have operators, players, and also newbies that just want to learn about the sector. But for lawyers now, how do you think lawyers can then use their legal career to promote digital finance in Nigeria?
So I would say that you first need to be interested. So I think for me I was interested. I think one thing that I also prepared for my career, I always interested in banking and finance. I knew I wanted to be a banking and finance lawyer. Some of the courses I took were tuned towards banking side of law. And so I think it was that interest that also got me interested in shadow banking during my master's, and that led me to peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding, and even when I returned, I was still trying to keep, to learn what was going on in that space, even though it wasn't the space that was at the time, booming in Nigeria, not like the way it is now. So I think it was interest that just got me to acquire knowledge, and that I think that's something that's very useful. First learn, get to know what's going on, acquire knowledge, interact with the technology as well, and that I think that sets you up for a career, so it's, and you never know where it would lead you. So today you might be interested in, like I said, you might be interested in blockchain, and then maybe tomorrow, from that interest, there might be an opportunity to work with something as crazy as quantum computing or whatever it is that these advanced engineers are always working on, and that just sort of builds your knowledge base, it builds your contacts, your network, and it also sets you up for a career in the space. But I would say in the order of find your interest, find what interests you, and also improve, get the knowledge. It might be as something as simple as just reading articles. I used to stay on tech. It was Tech Cabal, and what's the other one? Tech Cabal, yeah, and it was one of them. And I used to just, almost every other day, I used to just read the articles that he had on tech. I think it got me knowing the people in the space, got me knowing the technology that was prevalent here and all of that, and also follow the regulations. And I think that a combination of those just sort of leads you in the right direction, I would say. Okay. So I would say that I took one or two courses, but even at the time I was taking the courses, I already had had knowledge, and I was also fortunate enough to be in a space where I had access to companies that were in the space. So I worked on crowdfunding projects, advised peer-to-peer lending companies. I was working with, so I started working with branching while I was at UBO. Got exposed to the whole process of using alternative data for lending, scoring, and stuff like that. And that also just helps me and helps to further pique my interest in this space. So with the knowledge and the interests, I think the opportunity would also come. You're putting yourself out there, the opportunity would also come for you to apply the knowledge that you acquired and to also get more knowledge. Just trying to think of anything else that might be more practical than what I asked. But also share your knowledge. Yes, so that's also something that because again, you probably wouldn't. I think it's arrogance to assume that people know you, or it's arrogance to assume that people know that you know something if you don't put yourself out there. So as much as LinkedIn might be very crowded these days or whatever it is, but share your knowledge in articles and blogs, go on live Instagram, with some of us are still trying to gather the courage to do that. But for younger people, they probably can go live on Instagram, talk about these things and all of that. And that's how people get to know that, okay, this guy or this lady knows this thing, it's a new area of law, whatever it is. And I think that, I want to work with her, or I want to, get connected to her and offer opportunities. Because comes your starting point.
Thank you so much, Dolu. So my last question, I promise this is my last question. So when you were talking, you had mentioned a lot on peer-to-peer lending. Do you want to give us like a 1-minute discourse of what peer-to-peer lending is?
Okay, so peer-to-peer lending is an arrangement where essentially you're not, in the real purest sense of it, you're not borrowing from a bank or a financial institution. Essentially, your capital or the funds that you get is coming from a pool of several investors. So I didn't think about if you the normal way you get credit is to go to a bank or to go to a finance house or whatever it is to borrow money. But with peer-to-peer lending, there's a platform or there's an intermediary, so there's me, INC in the middle, and then I'm speaking with A, B, C, D, E, F people to pull their funds together such that we can now make it available to people that are willing to borrow. So it's something, so it's not like the concept itself is entirely new, because if you think about years ago where people would contribute on what's called the Treat Society in Nigeria. And at the end of the week, at the end of the month, the funds go to one person. That's some sort of peer-to-peer lending, but it's now become more popular because, again, you're able to do that with the use of technology. So everyone gets on a website or a platform to contribute to fund your project, to give you a loan for your business and all of that. So that's essentially what FinTech.
Okay. So I know I promised that that was my last question, but Moses asked question on international framework of regulation of FinTech, as he has a follow-up question. So I'm just going to read that. I can probably even just answer this. In view of the international nature of the activities of FinTechs, how is jurisdiction determined? You're lawyers. For instance, if I open a FinTech in Ghana and provide services for Nigerians, will the Nigerian courts have jurisdiction over me? The first question is, can he even provide FinTech services in Nigeria? And then will Nigerian courts have jurisdiction over him in Nigeria?
So the way that I think about this is, first, for some countries, you also can, even though you're registered in Ghana, you wouldn't be able to provide certain services to people in Nigeria just because it will be regarded as doing business in Nigeria, and then it means that you need to get a license, you need to be incorporated here, and you also need to get a relevant license. But even with that, there are still entities that are able to offer. So for example, sorry, excuse me.
Bless you.
Amazon, Google servers are not in Nigeria. The entities that provide services themselves are not in Nigeria, but they're providing services to Nigerians. So typically, what you would have, and this is something that you also need to sorry,
bless you.
Need to consider would be, where is your contract being performed? Because that's something that if the court were to look at this, where is your contract being performed? If it's something that transcends as a money transfer, is it where the money is coming from, or the country that the recipient is at? If that's where your contract is being performed, then most likely that might be the jurisdiction that will be applicable to settle disputes. But that's something that usually will be stated in the terms and conditions anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So that is the last question. Thank you so much, Tolulokwe. It's been a pleasure learning from you. It's been enlightening. Thank you for joining. Hope the next time we call you for this, you're going to come again.
I will be happy to. And thanks a lot for having me. I think this was very, very exciting and interesting.
Thank you. Thank you, Tolu. So we've come to the end of the first ever AELEX FinTech Fireside Chat. And thank you, everyone's online audience, and to everyone streaming live on YouTube. Thank you to everyone for joining. And you can still watch this on YouTube pretty much later. And this is the first of its kind. We hope to also continue this. So till then, see you at the next Fireside. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was just going to ask if it was okay for me to say one line about Branch.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, so I work with Branch. We're a leading finance hub in Nigeria. We provide loans to Nigerians, quick, fast loan service. And more excitingly, we also have free transfers, and I think our current, probably our latest product that's got more people downloading the app is our investment products, where we offer you very, very exciting returns. We're licensed by the CPN anyway, where we offer you as high as 20% per annum returns on your investment. So you should check it out. It's called Branch. It's offered it's only available on Android right now. We don't have an iOS version of the app, but you should try to get it.
Okay, but is it on web as well? Or it's just Android app?
No, it's just Android. But we will people soon.
Okay. Thank you, Tolu. You've learned about Branch. You've learned about the FinTech space. Thank you, everyone, for joining. See you at the next Fireside Chats.
Thank you,
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.